Richard Rumelt, a warm welcome to you. 1998, you were sitting down with Steve Jobs. You were endeavoring to get to the heart of what Apple's strategy was, and instead you got a response as to, well, I'm going to wait for the next big thing. Just how surprised were you when that was what came back from Steve Jobs?
Carson, that was a very surprising response. I was coming off of interviewing 30 or 40 technology executives at the time, and they gave me fairly standard answers to my questions about what makes for success in your industry. And generally speaking, the answer was there's some kind of change. A new technology appears, and the first company to get a hold of it successfully has a long run. And then I would ask them, well, what are you guys doing? And they would say, well, we're making alliances, we're putting software into firmware. They're basically doing what I would call doorknob polishing. And then I spoke to Steve Jobs, and I said, you know, you've saved Apple from bankruptcy, but you still got 3 or 4% of the market. You're obviously not going to be the desktop company. What are you going to do? And he said, I'm going to wait for the next big thing. And you can see that as I saw that as an amazingly clever response, because he understood that the technology comes in waves and changes. And it's a predatory response. It's like you have to imagine the predator hiding in the bushes and waiting for the fat elk to come by. And that fat elk for him was iPod, and then iPhone, and then iPad. And these things, they were what he was looking for. They got him out from under the Microsoft Intel world and into a place where he could fashion his own game. And that's what he had been looking for.
And yet, would that same approach be possible all these years later, given heightened shareholder expectations, if not activist responses to underperformance from where you sit?
Well, shareholder expectations have always been there. You're not going to get rid of them. If you take them too seriously, they can drive you insane. The real expectations are that you don't surprise people horribly. You don't say, we're going to do this, and then come out here, because it's a sign that you don't know what's going on. There are plenty of companies that can manage for the long term. Boeing can put in billions on the next aircraft, and then the stock price doesn't tank, because they trust Boeing to do a reasonable job of a long-term expensive project. But there are many companies that don't have that trust, and so they get in trouble on it. Steve Jobs won that kind of freedom, partly through his executive power, partly because he just ignored the stock market. Today, a guy like Jeff Bezos at Amazon has pretty much the same attitude. He says, I will invest money, sometimes I will lose money, sometimes I will make money. If you don't like it, buy another stock.
I mean, those are outrageously successful companies that you've just cited. But equally in your own book, you've acknowledged, unless collective ruin is imminent, a change in strategy will make some people worse off. And that's kind of the paradox of a lot of this, is it not?
We, as humans, in the current way we're structured in society, we rarely make strategic changes unless the wolf is at the door. Because a real strategic change is a choice to do this and not this. And the people who are involved with or interested in or connected with the thing that's being pushed off the table justly scream loudly, complain, but nevertheless, strategy is about focusing your resources on the most critical issues. And if you can't do that, you don't have strategy. You know, Carson, in most businesses, there is a drumbeat of budgeting. And the enemy of good strategy in most governments and most businesses is this quarterly, maybe monthly drumbeat of the budget. And then at the senior management levels, they extend the budget to 3 years, to 5 years out in the drumbeat. And they call it strategic planning. And you look out 3 to 5 years at your budget. Now that's not strategy. That's financial forecasting, but it gets called strategy.
And yet back on your book, you've acknowledged that once you're in that strategic paradigm, as it were, the job, quote, of the leader is also to create the conditions then that will make the push effective to have a strategy worthy of the effort called upon. Just where are we at with leadership on that score?
That kind of leadership is grown through people doing tough things. If you're looking for a leader who can do that, first of all, you're looking for someone who's done something hard, something difficult, who's been through a certain amount of fire and has succeeded at it. And then you need to give that person some power. They have to have some discretion to choose. Those are the conditions that you have to set up. If you look at Jack Welch and his enormous changes he made at GE, the amazing thing, first of all, is he did it without there being a crisis, but the board backed him. Somehow, and this is a secret story that none of us quite understand, he got the power to drop brands that were 100 years old, to close divisions. He got this extraordinary ability to act. Lots of companies, when someone starts to do that, there are phone calls at the night, there are the Congress people call in, and you're blocked. And he got that power. And so the power is necessary to change things, to move in a new direction. Typically, we don't. Here in Australia right now, we're worried about commodity prices and the growth in China. And all these things are fairly foreseeable. Prices don't always keep going up every year, and growth doesn't go up every year. But when it begins to happen, it feels like a surprise. And the stuff that should have been done in preparation, well, it wasn't done. And Australia's a lot better off than the U.S. right now. The U.S. has got huge problems because we didn't anticipate a time when the growth wouldn't always be pleasant.
And you come here with an expectation from clients that you're actually going to do something more than just leave them hanging, right? I mean, you've got to put something definitive out there for them to act on, surely.
Well, when the exchange rates fall, because right now you're in a Klondike economy. Prices are high, exchange rates are high. The standard of living of Australia, actually from the time I was first here 6 years ago, it was lower than the U.S., now it's higher than the U.S. That's the impact of your boom. And the standard of living is higher partially because imported goods are cheaper. How do you turn that and invest it in human capital and infrastructure and increases in productivity? And that's a serious question. The areas in which Australia probably needs to pay attention are its high value, high human skill services. It's consulting services, it's financial services, it's insurance services. These are areas where it's losing share actually to Singapore, Hong Kong right now. And that requires infrastructure, it requires places for people to live. It's interesting if you look at Canary Wharf in London, where London was set out to build the physical infrastructure and set aside the housing for the fairly well-to-do people that would live there. A difficult set of choices, because in a society where most people aren't that well-to-do, to have the government actually set aside resources for people who are bankers could be a political hot potato. And yet that sector is ultimately perhaps the driver of sustainable advantage and growth here in Australia.
There's a bit of a cop-out culture that we are forever falling back on, criticizing government for not putting in place the right settings for business to thrive, when in fact business, if it had the will and the strategy, would just get on regardless.
Governments have a huge problem because they can't focus. They are in the business of doing so many different things that they can't say, well, we're going to drop everything but this. They can't do that. And so to the extent that they have strategies, it's going to be in different areas. They're going to have an education strategy. and a defense strategy and a social services strategy and so on, to the extent that they are. The thing that really helps a government, that makes a difference, is for them to do a diagnosis of the problem that they're facing. So, for example, Los Angeles school systems, which I write about in the book, I mean, it's been in trouble for 35, 40 years. Right now, we're 40% of the students don't graduate high school. There's lots of remedies being circulated around, but you can't have a remedy unless you know what the problem is. So the diagnosis of the problem is essential. People don't like to talk about problems. They don't like to say, here's the disease. But unless you do that, you're just basically throwing money at things and hoping something will change, which might make sense 25 years ago, but we've done that, and it doesn't work.
Indeed, money would seem to be the great panacea when it comes to a central bank response globally right now. Buoys everyone up with optimism short term until what? The dust settles.
You know, the thing that's affecting the world right now is everybody borrowed too much. So we got over levered. Not here. In the United States, we have legislation to regulate financial services. But it could have been a one-page document. It could have said, you don't lever up more than 15-to-1, and you don't ever loan anybody more than a certain percentage of home values on homes. I mean, basic, simple rules that could be etched in the marble above the door of the bank. You don't need 2,000 pages of regulation. So we're in a deleveraging economy. The Federal Reserve in the United States right now is engaged in the beginnings of QE3. They're obviously simply trying to reignite the consumer-led boom that we had, which was driven by consumption. And if you look at that, that was driven by increased borrowing. One of the big drivers of a modern economy is when you open up consumer borrowing. You provide credit cards, you provide 30-year mortgages, you provide equity loans. So right now in the United States, the Federal Reserve is opening up QE3, which is a simple attempt to ignite consumption by making it easier to borrow for a house, making stock prices higher so that people feel wealthier. I think it's a mistake. I think that the United States had a consumption-led boom for 25 years. And that boom was fueled by increased borrowing. Credit cards is a great source of economic growth. You go to a country where there's no consumer credit, you introduce consumer credit, consumption goes up. You introduce 30-year mortgages, consumption goes up. You introduce home equity loans, consumption goes up. But there's a ceiling now. You hit that ceiling and you're tapped out. And then people come along and say, let's get people to borrow even more as the solution. That's not the solution. You're just going to reignite a consumption boom that can't be sustained. People can't grow the economy by simply borrowing more every quarter. It's not a sustainable thing. Right now, people are trying to do that on the justification that it's a fix to the problem of employment. And then what? If employment picks up, are they going to take the credit away? You know they're not. So you're going to create another bubble, and there's going to be another bust.